There's merit in established businesses that already have, an element of a budget and an element of revenue gained and an element of traction, in the same way that an investor looks for that traction and looks for that substance. To a degree, myself as a fractional CFO needs to be looking for a reason to put the time in, like alongside the belief of the brand, right? Because it's important to believe in the brand, but my business won't run off of just believing in everybody else's brand.
Hello and welcome to the Gross Profit Podcast. My name is James Kennedy. I'm the CEO and co-founder at procurementexpress.com. We take the hassle out of managing your company spend with magical features, but we're not here to talk about that today. Instead, I'm continuing my series of interviews with fractional CFOs. Today, I've invited Karen Stephen to talk about her career arc, what it's been like to start a business as a fractional CFO, what she's learned along the way, and how she came to discover her ideal customer. So Karen, thanks a million for coming along. Your accent will give it away a bit, but maybe you could just introduce yourself and your background a little bit, and we'll get into some questions.
Yeah, of course. So yes, as James mentioned, I'm a fractional CFO. I've been working as a chartered accountant or qualified as a chartered accountant for about 12 years. Spent time in London working for big corporations and stepped out into the fractional CFO space about 3 or 4 years ago, working with small businesses, new business, and growing businesses.
Great. And can you talk about who you worked for and what made you want to make, you might be someone here listening to this sitting in working for a big corporation. What was it like for you? How did you know it wasn't a fit, and what gave you the courage to take a step?
The longest time spent in a corporation was at Virgin Media, and it was during that career that I realized that I wanted to step out of the mold a little bit more. I come from an audit background, and I really liked working with multiple businesses and understanding their business model. So within Virgin Media, it was more, there was a lot, at any big corporation, there's a lot of conflicting opinions, there's a lot of politics that go on. And I liked stepping out of that space into working with smaller businesses, newer businesses, fresher businesses, because you can get more involved in the day-to-day, you can get more involved in the strategic decisions, and that's really what sets my little productivity on fire.
Cool. And so does Virgin Media, were you an internal auditor or did you externally audit them?
No, sorry. I should correct. So I came from an audit background before I moved to London and worked in these commercial organizations such as Virgin Media and Money Supermarket. So within those organizations, I was working as what they call a commercial finance business partner or head of finance, but always in the commercial finance side of things, which is basically helping a lot with the commercial negotiations and the finance decisions associated with actually running the business rather than the transactional side. So I've got all the background of the lovely accounting standards and transactional side because I trained up in audit, but then I went 180 degrees into the commercial side because that's really where I shine.
Right. Interesting. So in the pre-interview, you talked about how you'd have to dial into your masculine energy sometimes, which I thought was an interesting. And was that something you had to do on the commercial? Commercial to me sounds scary and in sort of, what's the word? Confrontational. Was that what you didn't like?
It wasn't so much the commercial side. It's just natural in most finance structures within large corporations, within bigger, more established businesses, but just in the finance industry as a whole. To stand out in that space, I've always had to dial into my sort of masculine energy, be very strict and bold and quick decisions, very organized, very structured, and not necessarily always showing my true personality and my true sort of feminine intuition or nurturing side. That doesn't go down the best in a finance role.
Okay, interesting. So you stepped outside, and so There's a really bad joke because I used to think my last boss was an asshole until I started working for myself, and it's certainly very true that you can go out, build a business, and then suddenly realize you're just working in one of those businesses you're trying to get out of. So, what's your dream? What did you learn from that, and what you say in 10 years' time? What would be different about working in the business that you're building?
What I've already found is that in the business that I'm building, I can work with clients that align with my values and that allow me to show up as my full self rather than put on a mask of like masculine finance. I have already worked with clients that show up like that, but also clients that definitely don't fit that mold. And I've learned during that process that, those are the clients that I cease working with just because it's not a good fit. And I think in my ideal over the next sort of 10 years, I continue to work with businesses, with their CEOs and founders that recognize the skills that I bring that are outside your traditional finance model, your traditional CFO model, which is way more soft, nurturing and work-life balance orientated, just because of some of the yoga training and the self-development work that I've done outside of finance.
I love that idea. I mean, I personally, I like bringing my whole self to work. Atlassian are famous for this. So where, you don't have a work persona and then you have your real persona. I find that quite stressful. And it's kind of fun playing playing professional, if you say, like in corporate world or in bigger place where there's a certain etiquette and there's the suits and all that sort of stuff. But I find it at a base level kind of, you're never really sure who people are, which always kind of bugged me.
I 100% agree, and that's what didn't vibe with me when I was in those corporations. And I'm not saying all of them were the same. Virgin Media is the one I worked at the longest, so it's my best example of that, where I felt I couldn't necessarily show up in the same way.
Yeah, and I mean, we're 10 years in this year, and now I'm starting to, when you mentioned values there, your company will have a set of values it depends on whether or not you've chosen them. They will evolve or they will happen, right? And now it's hard. So if you were to, what would authenticity sounds like one of the values that you would want? Can you think of any other that really are very important to you?
It all stands around that authenticity, honesty, and dedication and motivation. Because I'm a big sort of health fitness nut, but when it comes to the thing that drives your business, it's the same as the thing that drives you to get to the gym. You need to have a balance of dedication because like you're not always going to show up with motivation, but those two together would be values that I have in my business.
Cool. Very good. And do you like classes or is there a particular, seems like there's religions of fitness these days. I haven't really picked a religion, but there's CrossFit, there's all these things. What's your religion?
I'm a CrossFit person.
You're a CrossFit. There we go. I got it. Okay. All right. Cool.
But ironically also a yoga teacher. So like, I'm not sure that I fit in either model, but I go through phases of both. But CrossFit is my current religion that I'm addicted to. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm too intimidated to try CrossFit. It sounds crazy. I see the internet memes and it's like, oh my God, those guys are tough. I like it, but I'm not ready for it. Cool. All right. So we covered, you want to bring your whole self to work. Oh, man, I totally get that. That's cool. You stepped off the precipice. Your mom probably said, what are you doing? You decided to go and start getting your own customers. Did you have any on the side at that stage or did you just walk straight off the cliff?
No, I walked straight off the cliff. I actually took a little bit of a gap outside of directly serving in the finance space for about 6 months where I dabbled in different creative modes like social media management and stuff, just to figure out if I really wanted to be in the finance space. And like I told you in our pre-interview, I came across a lot of founders and entrepreneurs within my network who actually needed financial advice. So I was being dragged into coffees and dinners and accidentally giving like a lot of CFO level advice before I even landed my first client. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came about.
Yeah. Okay. So terrible market, broke startup founders. They have no money, but they're fun to hang out with, I guess, speaking as someone that has been one of them. Um, and then what was happening there? Were you putting hours in? Did you find yourself doing unpaid work, or was it just not enough? Or it sounds like you like these people, so the values were aligned. Problem was just how did you learn which customers you should be looking for?
What I learned from that was more, and I didn't give a lot of time away for free at that point. It was more just having conversations with friends to recognize that there was a market for the CFO level services. However, yes, I did start to work with and do paid work with some of them. And what I learned from that process was there's merit in establishing there's merit in established businesses that already have, an element of a budget and an element of revenue gained and an element of traction, in the same way that an investor looks for that traction and looks for that substance. To a degree, myself as a fractional CFO needs to be looking for a reason to put the time in, and like alongside the belief of the brand, right? Because it's important to believe in the brand, but my business won't run off of just believing in everybody else's brand. So I've gone through the process of working with some customers that have had less budget, and I also do a lot of mentorship and advisory work in pre-revenue, pre-investment businesses, because it is the space I'm most passionate about, as I've explained. The problem being, obviously, that's not necessarily my best target customer for my business.
Okay, well, it sounds like they're a funnel, right? So you're meeting a bunch of people, it's networking, you get to show a bit of value, and then every now and again you make someone. So is there a particular, you mentioned brand, so I immediately think of e-commerce when I hear brand, because that seems to be the obsession there, not being a price competitor. So is there a sector that you particularly are interested in or you've consulted with?
I tend to work with customers or clients that are in the e-commerce, as you said, or the digital subscription business. That can represent the majority of customers these days. It's not, I don't think of it necessarily as an industry in its own, because everybody's business is trying to have a subscription model, if you will. But that's my bread and butter, because that's the background that I came from, and I've always worked with digital orientated businesses in the past. But I particularly warm to female founders and female leaders, just because I understand their journey a little bit more.
Okay, coming back to this masculine feminine thing, so is it easier for you to be yourself working with female leaders?
No, not necessarily. I think it's the same either way. I actually have found that male CEOs resonate really well with me, and that might be a balance of energies. But yeah, I can easily be myself now that it's my business in with either a male CEO or a female CEO, depending on the values that they carry and the objectives that they have.
Cool. All right. I'm being controversial with these questions now, but I'm trying to figure this out. I guess, I mean, of course, let's think about it. I mean, we all have male and feminine energies, right? So it's just depending what you're putting on at any one time. So not defined by your physicality, let's say. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Since you mentioned e-commerce, I have to mention an interview I did with Jens Sonnenberg, episode 58, where we talked about the big changes that are happening in Gmail deliverability. Because if you're in e-commerce, you're dependent on credit card transactions, and if you need credit card transactions, you need your email reminder, dunning emails, etc., to work, and that's all changed as of 1st of February 2024. So check that out. Okay, cool. So who now? I'm going to ask you the most unfair question. Well, who's your favorite client and why?
My favorite client is one I'm no longer working with, but the reason that he was my favorite client is because we worked very well together. We shared the same values. We had the same alignment in terms of how to approach problems, but he was more risk taker and I am the cautious sort of CFO risk averse that I bring to the table. So it was a perfect balance for any business decisions that we're going in, where our values are aligned, but our approach to a problem might be slightly different, or our approach to a solution would be slightly different. And I really enjoyed working with him because of that.
Okay, cool. And I know entrepreneurs are sometimes scatty. Let's face it. Let's just call it what it is. They can be all over the place. Each week, you come in. There's a new business idea. There's a new thing that's going to happen. How do you manage? How do you manage that? Do you have it like? How do you put your arms around someone who's got a new idea going a mile a minute?
So this is where my yoga training comes in, because it's all about holding space and setting boundaries and helping people prioritize. So there's always going to be so much going on in a new business and new ideas coming. And because everyone I'm surrounded by are founders and entrepreneurs anyway, I'm used to doing this for my friends, and I do it likewise for my clients, where I I mirror back. It's a lot of coaching mechanisms, but I effectively mirror back what they've said their priorities are, what they are dying to do in that year or dying to do in that month, and help them compartmentalize and help them prioritize what is has just come through, and whether or not that's something we immediately need to go through, or whether it's not aligned to what we actually said we wanted to achieve. So it's a weird element of like coaching work that comes in, that is something that's always been natural with me, but it's just an ability to help them zone in on what truly is important, rather than all these different gimmicks and ideas and everything that are maybe coming through, or this guy said this today, or somebody gave me this idea today. And it's thinking about what's going to make the biggest shifts and what's going to take us to those goals.
Yeah, this pairing is one that I've seen more and more. I think EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system, popularized this idea of visionary and integrator. And, you know, I was just talking to Bridget Harris this morning on the preceding podcast to this about, you know, why do we have this company structure with a CEO and then all these, you know, this structure is basically the same in all companies. And EOS has come up with this different model, which is you have someone who's responsible for the ideas and the energy and the driving, and then the separate skill set is to be able to put that in like what we might traditionally call a COO. So where often the CFO and COO like slots are often indistinguishable or interchangeable. Have you found yourself stepping outside the P&L and the balance sheet and keeping people out of jail to get your hands dirty?
100%. Like I tend to, when people hire me as a CFO, they get more than what they bargained for, purely because like I have such a background of working with these large organizations, where I did have to do a lot of work with like HR, legal, tech teams, like the whole 10 yards, 9 yards. I'm not sure what that phrase is, but where I will happily step in and do some level of COO organization, definitely some kind of people management work, just because I'm owning the budget, I'm owning those relationships, and that's something that's very natural to me, also being like a talent manager in the past. So yes, I've definitely stepped into an element of a COO role, a people, like a head of people, and like legal advice to a degree. Although I would never claim to be any legal expert, and definitely recommend people hire in lawyers rather than use their CFO as legal advice.
Well, you mentioned the head of people. That's interesting. That's another common pairing, right? The CFO ends up with the HR responsibilities. Why do you think that is? Because it wouldn't be a skill set you'd immediately think sat together. Why does the CFO end up carrying HR?
It happens in big organizations also, and that's not to sort of discredit what the people team do. It's more because finance own the budget and are more into making sure that the costs are efficient or controlled. They tend to get heavily involved when it comes to, and I've been involved in the past with this, like change management, where, you know, there's big layoffs or there's big restructures to an organization. So finance often are heavily linked to the HR team because that is one of the biggest expenses that you have in any one business. So that's why we work with them so closely. From a small business or a startup point of view, a lot of people don't hire in anyone specific to hire in talent because the CEO or the leadership team will hire those in directly. And as a result, because my training and my experience is all sitting around hiring in people management, change management, it's natural for me to help almost, I mean, structured teams. That's what I do when I build my own finance team, and that's what I've done in the past. So the CFO, I think, is a natural fit, but I guess it would depend on what skill set the CFO in that particular business has.
Well, the CFO has that sort of, they're kind of Switzerland in that they're not on the upside oftentimes. They know the business, but they're not in the cut and trust, let's say, of getting the service provisioned often. So they're a little bit neutral. They're not the CEO exactly. So, you know, they have that sort of a little trusted third party, the same set of hands, if you might call it, if I think of some of the companies I've been involved with. So yeah, it makes sense. A safe pair of hands that are going to do a good job, that aren't necessarily arguing with you about the delivery schedules or whatever is happening in the cut and trust. So let's talk about a little bit about, okay, so you've worked with founders, you've started to build a profile here. Like, how are you structuring your own business in terms of, do you do sort of a fee base or an hourly base, or what? I guess all those models are out there, but what do you feel like works best for your clients? What are they looking for?
I actually feel like a lot of people don't know what they're looking for when it comes to a fractional CFO. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that exists at the moment. There's a lot of expectations and a lot of assumptions that are made. When it comes to my business, if I'm being brutally honest, I've been creating an offer that works for that particular client. So that can either be a retainer model. It roughly works off of an hourly rate that I'm comfortable with. But it can be a project based amount. It can be, I've got a model that works on revenue growth if it's a revenue growth organization, but I also have capped models and capped retainers just because of the level of work and the budgets that people are dealing with. So it needs to make sense for both parties, obviously, but I don't have like a set retainer that I use for every client because it depends on the level of service and the level of what they're actually looking for. But where I see the difficulties arise is that there's an expectation that all CFOs will work on a day rate, which means that you necessarily have to kind of take them in for a certain level of days rather than hours. And in my opinion, for certain levels of businesses, they don't really need like full days, for example. Even some established businesses may benefit from reducing their senior leadership staff into more of a part-time basis if they can trust people will do their jobs for the most part.
Yeah, okay, well, touched on a couple of things there. So, all right, so let's go straight to that. If you can trust people to do their jobs, what does that relate to?
Personally, that relates to, I've been employed in full time before on a contract where I could do my job within 3 days a week. So I think that there's sometimes there's a reluctance for people to trust everyone in the organization, so they keep people in at 5 days a week, or they keep people around because they're the ones that will fill the gaps, if you know what I mean. So they, because they don't have full trust in their whole team, they keep some sort of what I would call stretch in their budget for these extra heads. When it comes to what I refer to from a CFO basis, it's if you have people set up in a team where you know that you can delegate to them and they can own all the processes, and you have structures in place, you don't necessarily need a finance director or a CFO to be full time if everyone in that role is doing what they're expected to do and there's communication expectations and boundaries.
So what I'm hearing there is It sounds like maybe other people on the leadership team might be doing pieces of the work that could be covered by the CFO. Therefore, they mightn't be needed on a full-time basis. They could go part-time, and then that means their overall budget stays the same while getting you as an extra resource. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the organization, but yes, like I've had conversations with a couple of organizations that are looking to kind of downsize their CFO because actually the COO is doing the majority of that work and they had a full-time CFO that they don't necessarily require, so they're looking into fractional. So I think that, yes, effectively what you said.
Cool. All right, very good. So you seek to make an impact from day one, I can hear, like from the pay for yourself, let's put it that way. Okay, so you touched on budgets there. So in an organization, when you're going in, controlling spend, you say that's the responsibility of the CFO. A lot of growing businesses, it's normally the CEO who has it all, or it's spread all over the place. What's your experience, and how do you get your arms around a situation where people have been kind of just using the credit card or doing what they're doing and trying to put manners on the spend, as they say here in Dublin?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the most fun thing to do, right? As a finance person, it's like when you effectively have to be bad cop in an organization of any size. And for the most part, the businesses that I deal with, the spending patterns or the spending habits, they come from the top. They come from how it's being controlled from the CEO. And for the most part, the CEO owns the entire budget still. So the conversations start with him. And it's about identifying where there could be areas of more efficiency, where there could be reductions that number one is they won't negatively impact the growth of the organization. And number two, they won't negatively impact the culture of the organization if there is an established culture at that point, depending on how big the organization is. Because even though we as finance are the bad cops, you have to do that in a way that still, it doesn't like suffocate the business that's growing. It's one thing to cut costs in a mature organization and like do a bunch of layoffs, but when you're talking about growth businesses, you really need to pick and choose where costs can be reduced, costs can be made, what I say, efficient, because you don't want to destroy the pathway, you don't want to destroy the growth opportunities of the organization.
Yeah, and it's tricky. Like the head of Wrigley's chewing gum once said, only 20% of my marketing works. Question is, I'm not sure which 20%, right? So
yeah, I mean, marketing is always the most controversial budget in any business, if you ask me.
You mentioned being a bad cop. How does that feel?
It doesn't bother me as much as it feel like it should. I usually communicate things in a way that makes it understood by all parties why it's beneficial for everyone. So it's I'm never cost controlling on a way that's like, cutting things for no reason or capping people's hours for no reason. It's always on the idea that we're trying to get to a bigger goal and that everybody's going to benefit from that longer goal. So although I come in with the bad cop tendencies, I never do it with the bad cop personality. It's always trying to explain to somebody why this particular deal, this particular change of cost is going to help them as well as the business, right?
Right. Okay. So you take a larger view of what that business needs to survive at one end or achieve its growth targets on the other end.
It works well. It works well with smaller organizations or growing organizations because you find the people that are hired in have a belief, right? For the most part, they have a belief in the brand, they have a belief in the journey. So if you can translate to them not only that they will be part of that journey, that they're not going to be significantly negatively impacted, but the long-term sustainability of this business is going to benefit, and the goal and the dream that they've kind of bought into is also going to like survive, if you will. Because let's be honest, new businesses don't always succeed. They don't always survive in the long term. And people that kind of have bought in or come in as employees or contractors, if they enjoy working with that company, they want to be continuing to work with that company for the foreseeable future. So as heavy as cost control and cost efficiency is, it's designed to do it in a way that keeps the company breathing for longer and keeps everyone on the ability to serve the customers for longer.
Okay, so I hear, I mean, there might be a CEO listening to this of a successful but somehow struggling company that knows there are things that need to be done and need help in restructuring there. And then I can see, coming back to this idea of Switzerland in the business, you can kind of say, well, you know, they've looked at the numbers. This is the thing. This is the thing. And then it's more like a social engineering to help the businesses make the decision that they know they should make, you know? Wow. Okay. Exciting. So I'm not sure I would have the guts for it, to be honest, but I'm glad someone's doing it. But so, all right, let's go on to, so you've moved, you've, you know, what have you learned now? Like, who is your current, we talked about your favorite customer, very unfair question. Well done for answering it. So in terms of new customers that what have you learned is really the sweet spot of the ideal customer persona, if you like, the ideal person for you to work with?
What I've recognized now is that the ideal client that I'm looking for, the ideal customer that I'm looking for, is someone that has already gained a little bit of traction in their business. You know, they've got revenue coming in, they've got a business, like a minimum viable product, and they're generating a certain level of revenue, maybe like 1 to 2 million minimum. And the reason for that is because they already have a business. They've kind of gone through an element of the pain points, and they understand already some of the pain points that they need help with, but they might not necessarily have the correct visibility of understanding exactly what those problems are. I've worked with clients in this space before where they intuitively know that there's things that aren't going well financially, but they can't see it because they don't have the reporting, they don't have the visibility, they don't have those things. I do encourage people to get accountants and everything in, or bookkeepers in, before me, but I'm also very partial to bringing those in, helping them structure it, and building the whole reporting side also. Those are the level of clients that I'm working for, and some also ones that if they don't have revenue, they've got an element of investment coming from them, just because that is something that's going to give them the budget to be able to have those strategical financial conversations.
Okay. So what I heard there was I'll work for clients that can afford me. So let me push you a bit harder on that. So is it like, we talked about culture fit. That's very important. I guess it sounds like you thrive off these sort of entrepreneurial types that need to be tamed, as my wife describes it. Yeah. And then obviously you're based in the UK. So is there a geographic area, or are we living in a world where you can work for anyone?
No, there's no geographical limitation because I perform the majority of my work remotely. Some of my clients are in London, so I do go and visit them on occasion, but it's more like a 3 or 6 month visit. And yeah, I perform everything remotely, so there's no geographical restriction. In fact, a favorite client that I mentioned was actually in the US, so I work internationally also.
Yeah, okay. Shocker. The Scotty, full of energy entrepreneur was from the States. Amazing. Who knew? Okay. All right. That's it. This has been really cool to find out a bit more about your business. I hope if you're listening to this, you got a bit of an idea what it's like to work with Karen. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Karen Stevens CA on there. And you can check out my website at www.soulcfo.com.
SoulCFO, love it. Okay, thanks, Karen, for taking the time. I enjoyed having a chat. If you enjoyed this podcast, I will continue my series on interviewing fractional CFOs. If you yourself are one or you want to recommend one, you can email me, james.kennedy@procurementexpress.com. I should also mention that if you want to be one of almost 40,000 people who get our newsletter each week, you can sign up procurementexpress.com/newsletter. Until then, we'll see you in the next one.